welcome to today's On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway, a self-confessed Tudor nut, Tudor history addict, an author and founder of the Tudor Society website and Anne Boleyn File. So that's just so you know who I am. I think you do know who I am by now. Okay, today where are we going? Well, I think we're going to go to Elizabeth I's reign today. For on this day in Tudor history, the 8th of August 1588, Queen Elizabeth I decided to accept an invitation from Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, who of course was her childhood friend, her sweetheart, I believe, as well, and her favourite. And she decided to accept his invitation to visit the troops that he'd gathered near Tilbury Fort to guard the eastern approach to London. So they were guarding the Thames from the expected invasion by the Spanish Armada. Now, even though the remaining ships of the Spanish Armada were by this time homeward bound following the defeat of the fleet at the Battle of Gravelines on the 29th of July 1588, and in fact they'd been scattered by the strong winds, what people called the Protestant wind. This had helped, England to defeat the Spanish Armada. Even though that had all happened, England was still expecting to be invaded. They thought that there was a threat from the troops of the Duke of Parma, who would come across the English Channel as soon as the wind was favourable. So it was still important that the Thames was guarded. Leicester had written a letter of invitation to the Queen on the 27th of July in an attempt to stop her doing what she was threatening to do. She was threatening to ride to the south coast and to meet the Duke of Parma's troops herself, and she really did panic the Royal Council by threatening this. So Leicester wrote of how she could visit Tilbury and bring comfort to the troops there. Now, Elizabeth's council weren't keen on her doing this either. They wanted her to remain in safety in London, but Elizabeth decided to completely ignore their advice and to set off for Tilbury, which was better than her setting off to meet the Duke of Parma's forces as they came across the Channel. It was a slightly better option. And she travelled from St James's Palace to Tilbury by state barge along the Thames on the 8th of August. On her arrival at Tilbury, the Queen reviewed her troops who'd gathered to greet her, and then she spent the night at Saffron Garden in Edward Ritchie's manor house. The poor Earl of Leicester, we have to give a thought to Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. He must have been completely exhausted. By the 26th of July, he'd assembled 4,000 men at Tilbury. And Susan Fry, in her article, The Myth of Elizabeth at Tilbury, writes of how he'd quickly assembled 4,000 more by Elizabeth's visit, and he'd also organised a boom across the River Thames. So he'd done an amazing amount of work in a very short time. And on the 4th of August 1588, he complained to Sir Francis Walsingham in a letter. He wrote that he was having to do everything, to be cook, caterer and huntsman. So the poor man was tearing his hair out. He was obviously feeling very overwhelmed and overworked. All that, and there were reports that the Armada had been sighted coming up the Channel. So we can only imagine the stress that the poor Earl of Leicester was under at this point. And in fact, the Earl of Leicester died on the 4th of September 1588. So just a few weeks after he'd written, just a month after he'd written that letter of complaint to Sir Francis Walsingham, because he'd already been ill. But it makes you wonder if the stress of the situation had, brought on this last bout of illness that killed poor Earl of Leicester. So perhaps tomorrow, or I might just tell you a bit more about Elizabeth's visit to Tilbury. We'll have to see. You can subscribe to this channel by clicking round about there. You can hit the bell to be notified of videos as they go live, but rest assured I'll be back tomorrow with another Tudor goodie for you. See you then. Bye bye.